Hello, so my name is Jaqueline Jaquez, and I'm going to go ahead and answer our three questions. So the first question is saying, in what ways did you find yourself in a sermon? Which character did you identify? So I'm going to be reading my notes. So this one, I saw that like after the people of Israel crossed the sea, they started to complain. And then they didn't have enough water, and Moses goes and tells God, and God says, just throw a stick, and then the water will become sweet. And then they said once they drank it, they were happy for now. And then that's what like the sermon was saying. It's like, oh, the people were happy for now. And then he was saying again, people were happy for now. And that's what I found myself. It reminds me of me, because I am the type of person that I catch myself complaining most of the time. And let's just say if I have a goal for myself, I'm like, okay, like for my example, my students, like, I'm like, oh, like, I don't like going to work, but, and then I go to work, and then it's great, and then I'm just like, okay, I'm happy for now because they did X, Y, and Z, but then I find myself complaining again because I have to come home and do homework, and it's just like, I'm never content with my life. I'm just like, oh, I always want more and more and more, and that's one thing that the people were doing. They were complaining, and that's, I'm like, I feel like I never have enough, and that's, I feel like that's us as humans being greedy. Like, even though yes, I did get to my goal, I'm still going to complain about that goal because I still want something else. So, like, we're always wanting to have more and more and more. Another thing was with Moses, when he started getting frustrated with the people and asked God, like, what am I going to do with these people? Like, it reminds me of myself, too, with my students. Like, I have a hard time every day dealing with the behavior and the problems, and I cry out to God, and it's like, okay, is this really what I want to do? I'm like, am I really doing the best for these kids? And I catch myself thinking, okay, am I even going to come back to work tomorrow? Because if you're a teacher, you understand, like, it's just like, you have your good days and you have your bad days. And it reminded me of Moses, because like Moses is trying his absolute best. Like, he's like, okay, well, when these people complain, I'm over here coming to God and talking to him, and then he gives me a solution and he does it. And the same thing with me. For my example, I pray to God, and then like he's giving me the solutions, but I come to work and it's just like, ugh, like I don't want to do it. Like, is this really what I want to do? Like, for one time, like I was like crying in my room, like after the kids left, because they just left my room a hot mess, and I was just like hysterically crying. And I was even sitting in my room, and I was just like, oh my gosh, God, like, if this is really what you want me to do, like, I don't even know like my why yet. Like, I do know my why, but it's not, I don't feel like it's strong and passionate, like if I'm like really struggling, if this is really what I want. Because I've always felt it in my heart that I've always wanted to be something more than a teacher, but I do want to help people. That's my thing. And I was crying in my room, and I was just like, God, like, please, like, is this really what I want? And is this really what I need to do, like, right now? And then, like, a principal, like, she literally came in, and she was just like, I felt like God had told me to come over here and talk to you and just tell you how great you're doing. And I just started crying. I was just like, oh my gosh, like the fact that God works his mysterious ways. And I didn't tell her. She just probably thought I was just crying just because I was having a bad day. But I told her afterwards, and she was just like super happy and super stoked about it. So about this, I'm still trying to figure out what God wants me to do, but we're getting there. We're getting there. So for question number 2, it says, what points of the sermon resonated to you, and what points challenged you? So in this one, it was like, those who sin are a slave to sin. And that is so true. Like, before I just started my journey, like going back to church and going to God. But when I was 19 or 22 years old, I was a rebel. Like, I was wilding out. I was over there smoking every single day. I was never sober. I was drinking. I was out there having sex, doing all this other stuff. And that's one thing he talked about. Like, what is that sin that's like getting to you? It's either substance, sex, or shopping, or to labor. And that is me. We have more stuff than anyone in the world, but we're more in debt. And that's what the sermon guy said. Like, to me, it's because we're greedy, like how he said. We don't know when to stop. And I'm guilty on this, because we pay more attention to what others have. And we have more choices, but we're paralyzed by the choice. That's what the sermon said. Like how I am, and I overthink when I know I have the answer to my solution, but I just choose to look with the stressful eyes. And going back to what I was saying, like I do have all these choices, and I could have made better choices growing up, but I was also young. Like, I didn't know, and I was blinded by my friends, and I was like a slave to my sin. I would stop smoking, and then I would go back to it. I would relapse every single time because I would see my friends doing it, and me, I fall into temptation really quick. So I was just like, I have to have it. I have to have it. So I really was a slave to my sins because I could not go a day without smoking or drinking. I was never sober. And then another thing is that like we want more and more, and I pay attention to my quote unquote neighbors. So like me and my boyfriend, we live together and we want to get a house. And it's just like I focus so much on like the people that have a house and like they like what do they do and how did they get that house. And it's just so like, well, I had to think to myself like, well, they worked hard for that house too. But it just makes me feel sad in a way because in this economy is getting worse and worse. So it's just like, man, I want to get that house like the one that they have. And so it's a work in progress, but we are guilty of trying to look at what our neighbor has, and I'm trying to get better. I'm not looking at them as in a jealous way because I don't ever want to look at someone in a jealous way, but it's more like, dang, I want to get to their point of view, like their point. And then there's also was another part of the story where like people were too focused on Pharaoh's ghost and they were just living in fear, like, oh my gosh, what if this happens again? Like they're just like too scared to keep going, and they're just like, oh well, what if we end up with no water? What if we do that? We just are too focused. They were just not, the sermon said that we were too focused on the past and they didn't want to move forward. And that was like in a positive perspective, and that was thinking about me. Like me, I always think about my past, and it's like, well, if this didn't happen, like I couldn't be able to do this back then, like what makes me think I'm maybe able to look forward? But that's what's keeping me behind, because I'm just too focused on what I couldn't do and what I wasn't able to do instead of having to look forward. That's one thing that I've learned about the sermon too, as I named. I'm like the people from Israel because I'm over here too focused on Pharaoh's ghost and I'm focused on my ghost, so I need to go ahead and look for. So those are the points that are challenging me and like the people that I have resonated with myself. So then the last question said, how did this sermon reflect God's character and values, and how can you apply it in our lives today? I was like, one thing that I've noticed is like God is the most terrifying person, but he's also the most inviting person. Like, yes, he's awful, mysterious, and fascination, but he's a fascination. And when you're in his presence, you are terrified but don't want to leave. And that is so true, because like me starting this journey back again with God, like I am so scared to like walk into the faith because I know like he's gonna change my life, and I'm not ready for my life to change because I'm just like, okay, well, I still kind of want to keep the same things, but I know he has a better plan for us and for me. And it says like he has up to, it was never about getting people out of the bondage. This was never about a miracle of the Red Sea. But this was about God forming a new nation around the world like his covenant. Like he chose us as people. He describes the people as a bride. And Yahweh marries that bride. And that's like his vows to us. Like he basically chose us to live here and to be here, and like these are like the vows, and like no, like we should not have any praise other gods. We should not honor, and we should honor our mothers and fathers, like no killing, no adultery, no stealing, no lies, no duplicity, no covenanting. And then we're just like, we have to go back. So like that's showing like God's characters, because he wants us to live his life through him. We don't want to go back to living that old life that we used to have as a slave. So like me, I lived my life as a slave before because I always did X, Y, and Z, like how I mentioned before, like always not doing well, like always drinking and smoking, and just always focusing on my past and focusing on what other people have. Like he doesn't want us to live in slave anymore. He wants us to be like the people of Egypt that are just wanting to like look forward, even though the people of Egypt like took a while to get to that point. But it's like, do everything in the name of God. Like God equals freedom. And that's one thing that I've learned about this sermon, that like God only wants the best for us, even though he may be frightening and terrifying. And it is terrifying to take a step of leap of faith towards him. But that's what we need to do. That way we can live this life that he wants us to live. But thank you so much, even though it was super long. Thank you so much for listening to my story. And I hope you guys have a great day.